And we have started the recording. Welcome everyone. Just like to thank Kathy for being with us. This is our Soccer Athletic Trainer Society Town Hall meeting featuring our NATA Presidential candidate, Kathy Dieringer. Am I saying that last name right?
Just That's sure? Right. Okay. That's right.
Probably should have checked with you ahead of time, but
it's quite all right.
Yeah, so wanted to just dig a little bit deeper into what you are, obviously as a leader in our profession, but also hopefully a little bit about how you are as a person, and we get to have a little bit more of a conversation rather than just a straight up Q&A today. So again, thank you for joining us. I suppose I will pass the first question. I believe is Jess. All right, go ahead.
All righty. Hi, Kathy. I guess to get started on kind of a broad topic, can you tell us a little bit about how you became an athletic trainer, how that started for you, and then how your journey kind of progressed from there?
Oh, sure. Well, I was an undergraduate student at the University of Texas. I had not at that time ever been introduced to the profession of athletic training, didn't know anything about it. I was majoring in kinesiology. I was in a class, I think it was the history of kinesiology or something really obscure like that. And the professor started talking about this profession called athletic training. And I'd always had an interest in medical. I'd had an interest in sport. I really didn't want to be a coach. Didn't know, I was really kind of lost at that point. I'll be truthful with you. And she talked about this profession. And I went, that sounds really intriguing. Talked to her after class and she goes, well, go up to the athletic training facility and just kind of look around and talk to the head AT. And so I did, and it was like, wow. It was almost like this room had enveloped me and said, you belong here. So that was my start. I became a student athletic trainer in that program, graduated there, and I was one of those eaten up by athletic training students. I was there as often as I could be. I studied everything I could get my hands on. I was like a sponge. Graduated, took my board, and then went off to Eastern Kentucky University and worked with, he was president at the time, Bobby Barton, and learned so much from Bobby, not just about athletic training, but about leadership and service, because obviously I was living it every day, talking to him about what was going on in the NATA. So finished my master's degree, took a position at Florida State University as the assistant AT there, worked primarily with, I have to remember, swimming and diving and women's softball when I was there. Was there for a few years and I really wanted to come home. My parents were starting to get older and their health was getting a little frail. There was a position here in Denton, Texas, which is where I am now at Texas Women's University, as a head athletic trainer 2 years out of school. So it was a great opportunity for me to come. I learned that I didn't know what I needed to know to be a head athletic trainer, but again, tried to be a sponge, relied a lot on mentors. I was at Texas Women's for 12 years. And was so I was the only athletic trainer. We were a Division II school. Was really starting to get burnout because it was me and only me. Started looking at other options when someone came to town and said, hey, Kathy, we want to put an outpatient rehabilitation clinic in your town. We would like for you to run it. And I went, well, I don't know anything about that. And he said, oh, sure you do. We're just changing the building. Well, he kind of lied to me because there was a lot more about running an outpatient rehab clinic than I knew. But again, saw it as a challenge, learned about as much as I could. Our business was bought out a couple of times while I was with them. The latest, they kind of the new owners they challenged my ethics. They were asking us to do things that really made me uncomfortable. So I went in with another PT that was working there. We opened our own practice, and that was in 2003. And we opened a second, we opened a third. I continued to do outreach throughout all of that time. Worked with a local high school that we still have some connection to. Worked with local middle school football, got involved with one of our local soccer clubs, one of our local gymnastics clubs, and we're still doing some of that today. So that's kind of been my work journey. I think that's where you wanted me to go, right, Jess?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you. And I think that actually kind of takes care of what my next follow-up question was going to be, just kind of what encouraged you to go from one setting to the next.
Yeah, so it really was a combination.
Unless someone else has a follow-up.
Yeah, it was a combination of I was really, my work-life balance was horrid, and I needed more time with my family, and that's why I made that switch to the clinic and then switch to private. Because of, again, it was a challenge, but it was also, I couldn't stay in a company that was asking me to do unethical things. So, and here we are 17 years later.
Great. Anyone have a follow-up to that? Kelly, was there something that you wanted to ask?
What do you see are the biggest differences outside of the work-life balance in the clinic versus, you know, in the college setting? What do you miss about one while you're at the other?
Yeah. So my biggest miss when I first left were the kids. Being around young people keeps you young. And just being a part of that competitive atmosphere and being able to be a part of that team. And so what I tried to do when we moved into the collegiate setting was, moved from the collegiate setting into the clinical setting, was to create that team with my staff. And I've always tried to talk about, we are a family, we are a team, like, how do we work together? Truthfully, not the same. It's not the same as a collegiate team. And so I made it a point to stay involved with other types of sports. So working outreach, working with clubs so that I can still be around that athletic environment. So the biggest difference, yeah, that's what I miss. The hours, I have to say, are better at the clinic. They just are. The pay, I think it depends on where you are and what you're demanding. But the athletes, I mean, we have a relationship here with Texas Women's University. So we still see those collegiate level athletes. We obviously, because we've been here a while, we have a pretty decent reputation. We get a lot of high school athletes, we get club athletes. So we're still seeing that athletic population. We're just seeing them when they're hurt. So you have that advantage, of course, in the collegiate setting. You see them as people before they're hurt. And then through that whole return to play and back to return to play, we just see them in that middle part and then send them back. The fun thing, though, is then going and watching them play after they've been here. So we still get to enjoy a little bit of that as well.
I think you're
you don't have to jump every time one injured kid goes in for a tackle. It's my favorite.
So I'm sorry, I missed the first part.
Said when you just get to go and watch, you don't have to jump every time someone
yeah,
does something you're not sure about.
That's true. You don't jump as much when you're there watching. Sure.
Just a personal follow-up comment to that. I think you're spot on, Kathy. The difference between working in a team setting, you know, collegiate or pro or whatever, you know, might be, you're seeing these athletes on a day-to-day basis, and versus, you know, in a physician clinic or a physical therapy clinic or what have you, you're not seeing them on a daily basis. You might see them once a week, once a month, who knows? And so I think the relationship that you essentially value more is you're going to have to shift it from the patients or your clients really to more the people that you're working with on a daily basis.
Yeah. The fun thing that we get to experience here is when we're seeing a young athlete at, say, age 12 or 13, when they're starting their athletic career, and then 6 years later, you get to see them again. So that's a lot of fun because they've changed so much. And then I really have come to value my older patients, my 60 and 70-year-olds who are trying to stay active. They're trying to really improve their quality of life. And we've seen some that have been coming here for 10 years now, and they've maintained their health. And we take a little pride in that because they've gotten involved in our fitness classes or even as patients. So you change that focus to what kind of patients you're seeing, but I still have that same joy of knowing that I'm contributing to their overall health and well-being. And that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Thank you for that, Kathy. Next question, I believe, is Kelly.
That it is. So, Kathy, on your website, we noticed, that it says that you employ physical therapists, occupational therapists, and athletic trainers. But when I looked at your Meet the Team, I couldn't find any athletic trainers. How do you and your business use athletic trainers in your setting?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been asked it before. So I'm going to back up to when we first opened. When we first opened 17 years ago, it was just a couple of us, and as we built, I worked really hard on establishing outreach athletic training contracts. I worked with a school up the road that, well, it may not make sense to somebody not in Texas. It was a little 2A school, which is the second level. And I was their first athletic trainer. And I was hired because a young man at football practice one day ruptured his spleen and the coaches didn't treat him. And fortunately, CareFlight got there in time, but I got a call the next day to come and work with them. So I did that outreach contract for a number of years until they hired a full-time, which I take pride in because I kept saying to the school board president, you need to hire a full-time athletic trainer. You need to hire a full-time athlete. And he'd say, what, are you tired of us? Do you not want to work with us anymore? And my answer always was, I would love to be here, but your kids deserve a full-time athletic trainer. So we had those contracts. I established a contract with our local, it's Denton ISD, our local school district. We have about 7 or 8 middle schools in our district. I had another small high school up the road that at the time, one of my PTATs was also providing service for. And I had a smaller private school also in town that we were providing services for. So I had what I considered a very robust outreach sports medicine program. I had one full-time athletic trainer and a number of part-time PRNs that we were using to work all of these various contracts. So about 5-6 years ago, a hospital came into Denton. And so, mind you, my athletic trainers, we were charging a market hourly rate that covered my athletic trainers plus benefits. My profit margins were so slim, people called me crazy. But for me, it was about providing athletic training services. Big hospital group came into town and went to those same schools that I had, as well as many others, and said, we will put an athletic trainer in your school for $1,000 full-time. I can't compete with that. I obviously couldn't. I lost every single one of my contracts. At that point in time, multiple schools, middle schools, we were providing athletic training services to North Texas Football Club, doing ACL prevention, working tournaments, all gone, taken away because this hospital came in and offered these organizations not the same services, but in their mind, it was the same service. They were getting an athletic trainer for next to nothing. Don't blame them for making the change, but I lost my sports medicine program. My athletic trainers, my full-time stayed for a bit and we were using them here, but understand in Texas, athletic trainers cannot be reimbursed for services. I have been fighting that battle since I moved back to Texas in 1988. We need to get reimbursement in Texas, and it just hasn't happened. So keeping an athletic trainer on staff means they have to generate revenue on a cash-based system. And for the longest time we tried, and it wasn't sustainable. So my athletic trainers left through attrition. I didn't get rid of any of them. And I started covering the sports medicine activities that needed to be covered. So I do concussion return to play in the clinic, cash-based. We still have a relationship with a gymnastics club here in town. They didn't take him away because I had a long-standing relationship with him. And on any of the outreach that I have, I either do myself, or I still have a few athletic trainers in town that I hire PRN. So that's a very long story to a complicated situation. I would love to have athletic trainers side by side working with my PTs, but they're not reimbursable. And so there's that economic decision that has to be made. And I'm not the only one that's making those decisions. I learned recently that a hospital system in the Metroplex has a PT residency program and an AT residency program. Katie accredited both. They're dropping their AT residency program because that individual is not reimbursed in the clinic. So those decisions, unfortunately, are having to be made. And that's why you'll hear me talk a lot about the importance of working toward universal CMS recognition, not because we want to bill CMS, but because it will make us more likely to be reimbursed in healthcare. And that, I think, is a key to a lot of the things that we need to do as a profession, including having athletic trainers on my staff. Long answer, I'm sorry. It's a complicated issue.
No, that was an awesome answer. So kind of two follow-up questions. So when you work in the clinic, in the business that you own, are you not able to be reimbursed for services?
That's correct, unless it's cash.
Unless it's cash.
Unless it's cash. And so we have an industrial program that is functional capacity evaluations, work conditioning, post-offer employment. Post-offer employment tests are all cash. So I am able to do all of that. I'm able to do my return to play, concussion. Occasionally we will get someone who is, for example, doing an ACL rehab with our PTs, and they have a visit limit. So their insurance, which is crazy, that's a whole other world we can talk about. You get 12 visits a year, and that's it. Well, we, of course, eat that up in 2 to 3 weeks. And so we have that bridge program where, as an athletic trainer, I would continue that rehabilitation on a cash basis. But truthfully, those are few and far between, because once insurance runs out, most of them want to go back and do their own thing. So selling that has been mildly successful, but not universally successful, because it's money out of their pockets. So we try every day. I challenge my people every day, and I challenge myself. Is there another niche we can find? And that's what we're trying to do. Mostly cash pay. Cash is king. I'd rather have cash pay. But the reality is people want to use their insurance.
And then kind of the second question, and I know you touched on it, like, how are you able to fight to get athletic trainers in the state of Texas the ability to be reimbursed for services?
Yeah, that's an even longer answer. So in the state of Texas, our Practice Act is such that it still says athletically related injuries. So that's our first fight. We've got to get that updated, and we're working on that right now. I'm actually on a work group that's updating our Practice Act because it's so important. And if we can update our Practice Act, we are then able to freely treat anybody with an activity-related injury. So that's the first step. Once we get over that first step, then we take that information, that evidence that we can treat anybody, And there in Texas, there is a list of eligible providers that is on the state, the Texas Department of Insurance list. We have to be added to that list. That is a legislative fix. In other words, we have to introduce a bill and get the sponsors and know that we're going to be fought by some other providers that don't want us to be reimbursed, and fight that fight. We've tried it twice. It was back in the late 90s. We tried it, was unsuccessful for different reasons. And my state association has basically said, we're not going to do it again until we update the Practice Act. So that's where we are with that. We need it. We definitely need it.
You know, I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate your honesty, because I'm sure that's a tough question.
Yeah, but and it's a fair question. It's an absolutely fair question.
I really appreciate your answer, and all the work that you're doing to try and change it. And, you know, I hope that you can get it done and at least get the Practice Act going so everything else can go move on along.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for that.
Well, that was a really good question and answer there. Great follow-up questions too there, Kelly. I have the next question, so I'll go ahead. So Soccer Athletic Trainers Society, we represent athletic trainers at all levels of soccer in North America, not just in secondary schools, not just in college. We do have some pro level athletic trainers within our membership. So it really doesn't fall into any one category of the committees that are set up by NATA. So, you know, the intercollegiate committee or the secondary schools committee, it just doesn't fit into one mold. The one that I feel like maybe we fit into the most might be COPA with practice advancement. But so that was kind of the preamble to it. My question is, what do us as members, Soccer Athletic Trainers Society members, need to do collectively as an organization and individually to help forge a stronger relationship with NATA when what we represent doesn't entirely fit into any of the committees that are set up right now?
Wow, that's a great question. And I'm trying to envision all of those different aspects of the NATA. And obviously, the first word that pops into my head is advocacy for soccer athletic trainers toward the NATA. You're all, the way the structure of the NATA, you're right, does not lend itself to a particular sport setting as opposed to a work setting. And that is, I've never seen it as a limitation until you just now brought it to my attention. I've always assumed that a college soccer AT would gravitate toward the ICSM, a secondary school. Yeah, I see the dilemma. Is it?
Sorry, if I can just interject.
Sure.
So the reason why was I've reached out to multiple people within NATA, and some conversations are appropriate for one committee. So we had a conversation about our stance on the NCAA Division I men's soccer proposal for a full year model. So we had a stance on that. We made a position statement as a society, and that obviously goes with the intercollegiate committee.
Right.
However, youth soccer, for example, it doesn't fall into fully into collegiate. You know, we're talking about youth club soccer across the country, which is probably the most underrepresented in terms of athletic trainer coverage. So where does that fit in? That might be more COPA, but then, so there's multiple angles that we have, or multiple projects that we have that, again, doesn't necessarily fit into one category. We kind of, you know, we're a little bit here, a little bit there. So how do we bridge that gap and try to collaborate?
Well, So my first thought is there are other societies like you that are likely going through the same challenges that you're experiencing. So my first thought for a solution would be to figure out a way that to bring all of the societies together. And I don't mean necessarily every member, but maybe the president of each society. And we have a society brain trust to talk about these very issues. What is it? Clearly you have some needs that are not being met because of the way the NATA is structured. So I'm guessing that other societies probably are experiencing the same struggles. So let's get all of you in a room as presidents and talk about that and figure out a way that we can come up with a mechanism of information sharing, or how do you get an initiative to the right person in the NATA? And that may have to be the president of the NATA to start off with until we can develop that mechanism. I've heard other concerns of other societies that are similar in nature, and they're not sports societies, they're setting societies where that information is not being communicated or even considered in some situation. And that has to get better. You guys have formed your society because there are some needs that can only be met by doing so. I respect that. I respect that as a former board member. I respect that as an athletic trainer. And I would respect that as president of the NATA. Your voice matters. We've got to get you in a room and make sure that the needs that you have and the information that needs to be communicated gets to the right people so that your voice is heard and has an impact. So my best mechanism, I think, is let's figure out a way to have a society's, I don't like the word brain trust. Let me think about a good word for that. Is it a work group? Is it something to get you all in a room so we can, sorry, my lights are automatic. It's happened on, you'd think I'd learn. It's happened on 2 other chats already.
Noticed that, yeah.
Yeah. And I thought I fixed it, but that would be what I would start with. And again, I'd start with you and say, do you think that's something that might work? And if so, let's get everybody in a room and let's talk about how can we improve that communication.
Thank you for that answer, Kathy. Yeah, it's certainly something that I feel strongly about. Because I want all of our members, within our membership to feel represented, and that's obviously a challenge when we just don't know where we exactly fit in. So I appreciate that. Just as a follow-up, I mentioned earlier youth soccer and youth sports in general, I think, are the most underserved in terms of athletic trainer coverage. Is there something that you have in mind that might improve our situation, really for the health and well-being of all our youth athletes, to improve that going forward?
Yeah, it's all about advocacy, right? As I mentioned, I reach out to local clubs and provide services to those clubs, and it's basically an everyday injury clinic when I'm going in there, and it's many of them know who I am and what I do. They understand it, but they don't really understand why I'm there for them. They're not used to that attention. And so how do we make it more universal that a youth sport athlete should expect an athletic trainer to show up? And I think that's really about us doing a better job of identifying the governing bodies of especially youth sport organizations and becoming a part of the conversation, getting in the room with the decision makers and talking about all of the reasons that an athletic trainer should be at their events and why that's important. Because we all know they on some level they know, but how do we then advocate even further to make sure they truly understand the importance of having appropriate health care? I think up to now we've been waiting for opportunities. And in my world, I go out and I find the opportunities. So finding out who those decision makers are, the governing bodies, in your case, the USA Soccer, and really having those conversations about what's going on the youth sport level, and what do we have to do to get athletic trainers at your events. I really think soccer is one of the better ones, truly, of some of the other youth sport organizations I've seen. But we all have a very long way to go. So let's get in the room with the people who are making those decisions and becoming more of a tapping them on the shoulder. Hey, you really need this. Here's why. And coming up with that information to present. And then I've always said the most influential person is a mom who's mad. So let's get the parents upset that their kids don't have appropriate medical coverage. And that typically will turn the tide as well. So parent organizations, both scholastically and otherwise, and getting in front of the influencers, I think, is what's really going to make a difference for us to make sure that youth sports is adequately covered by healthcare us.
Yeah, I appreciate the answer. I've been working on some projects to try to get in touch with those leadership people, not necessarily just athletic trainers, but really the people that are in the leadership positions for whether it's youth leagues or governing bodies. Haven't quite gotten to the point where I'm sitting down with them, but you've confirmed that I'm kind of on the right track. So
Yeah,
I
think so. You know, our whole profession is all about relationships, right? It's always been, always will be. And those relationships are the ones that we aren't quite there, but we will be. We will be.
So Kathy, I had a follow-up and more just wanted to hear your thoughts and ideas. So like US Youth Soccer requires athletic trainers to be at all of their events, state cups, president's cups, at all of the levels. How do we go about educating people kind of on what our service is? I mean, I was at a regional level president's cup. I mean, it's been a few years ago, but I mean, I had a dad chasing me down screaming, "Ice lady, I need some ice." You know, and I feel like a little bit of what we have, I think you're right, a lot of the bigger clubs and the money clubs do have someone. But what about Podunk, Grayson County, Kentucky? And I grew up in Kentucky. I've been to Eastern a few times. But, you know, some of these places who these people just don't even know what it is. What are your thoughts on how we educate them? Because I think, and kind of tie this in to earlier, I think if Soccer Athletic Trainers Society goes up and says, "Hey, we think you should do this," they're going to be like, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
But maybe if we have some NATA, you know, collaboration, and we take it to them not only from people who love soccer and being a soccer athletic trainer, but from our governing body, we might get a little more oomph behind what
Yes.
we.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. And I've been that person too, where, you know, ice lady, I've been there. I think we all have on some level. And unfortunately we have 60, 70 years of history that's people knew us as trainer. They didn't know really what our skill set was or is. And we're still making that transition as we've transitioned our profession. I remember 5 years ago when the push was, no, we're athletic trainers and we're healthcare providers, and really talking about us as healthcare providers and not a part of athletics. But there's still a whole generation of people, that's how they knew us and that's how they know us. But you're really talking about education and advocacy. The same things that I talked about earlier. How do you get the word out to people? Part of it is, yes, media, social media is an incredible opportunity right now as well. How many of you swelled up with pride the first time you saw that football ad during the Super Bowl about athletic trainers and what we were doing? We would love to be able to do that. We won't tell you how many millions of dollars we got it free, but that typically costs. So figuring out a way to get the word out, both from a gross media standpoint and a social media standpoint, as well as advocating again with those groups, parent groups, sport groups, governing bodies, and all of the media resources that are available at your own risk, NATA. But I completely agree with you that when approaching those organizations, yes, your organization is important to be in the room, but having the NATA behind you would obviously give a little more oomph, and making that happen is what needs to be going on. I've said it before and I'll say it again. When one setting benefits, all settings benefit. So figuring out even the little things that we can do is incredibly important for the entire profession. And I think that's what advocacy, okay, I'm tripping over my words today, what advocacy is all about. How do we take that step? One athletic trainer at a time.
Okay, great. I think Wafa has our next question.
All right, so my question is, could you explain your journey from obviously working in the field and at the clinic to becoming the NATA president, and what are some of your philosophies and methods regarding leadership that you'd like to bring as president?
Oh, great question. So I mentioned that I did my master's work with Dr. Bobby Barton, and that really set me on my professional service journey. I'm a military brat, so I'm going to throw that out there. I proudly say that I'm an Air Force brat. My dad was career, my brothers were career. It's a part of me. So service is a part of my, I think, a part of my DNA. And when I met Dr. Barton and saw everything that he was doing as a part of service to the profession, it just really kind of got to my core. When I was in Kentucky, I was immediately put on committees. That's what you do when you're working for the president of the NATA, you get put on committees. And then I stayed in District 9 for a period of time. And so when I was at Florida State, I continued on some of those activities. When I came back to District 6, one of the first things I did was found our district meeting, and I started calling the district director. I want to get involved. I want to get involved. I want to get involved. And truly it took 3 or 4 years. And I think it was just because I pestered him so much, they kind of went, well, just put her on something and get her off of us. So they put me on registration. I worked on, where I think at the time everybody started. And then I just kind of built from there. I did a good job. They put me on something else. I did a good job. They put me on something else. They asked me to chair a district committee. At the time, we didn't have a state committee. Or we didn't have a state organization. So there was an opportunity there. And then after a while, I was actually appointed to the executive board to serve in an appointed position. And then again, it was about doing a good job, so you got noticed. I was asked to serve on an NATA committee. My first NATA committee was Women in Athletic Training. It was right after it was formed. So served on that for a while. And all during that time, serving appointed, doing a couple of other little committees in the district, and really networking, getting to know the other people in the district and in the NATA, and we all know how important that is, relationships, right? And eventually, when I was moving from college to clinic, the Committee on Revenue was created. So that was my first introduction to reimbursement. And I was like a dog on a bone. That's when I started really bothering the people in Texas about reimbursement. Served on that, I was asked to chair the Clinical and Emerging Practices Athletic Trainers Committee by Marge Albaum when it was formed. And that was an incredible experience. Around that time, I then decided I was going to run for president of District 6. And I ran and I lost. And I thought about walking away. I did. It's not fun to lose. But I decided to try and persevere, ran the next time and won, and served on the executive board, and was crazy enough to think I could be a district director. So ran for district director, won that position. One of the best experiences of my life, just to be a part of the process and the relationships of the people in that room was absolutely amazing. So when I got to this point, I'm eligible to run for president. Many of you may or may not know I ran for president last time and I lost. And I almost didn't come back. But I just felt like there was something left undone. There was something I still could contribute. So I decided to run again. My leadership journey has always been about giving opportunities to others, lifting them up, and leaving the profession better than I found it. I was thrilled to be a part of the Clinical and Emerging Practices Athletic Trainers Committee. That is a mouthful, right? At the very onset, because we got to set the tone. And now that committee is what we know as the Council on Practice Advancement. It's kind of morphed a number of times, and it's about moving the profession forward. And that's always been my vision of our profession. We do a great job at what we do. We're moving into healthcare. Let's continue to move that profession forward into healthcare. So my leadership style is about listening. I'm typically the last person in a board conversation to speak because I want to hear everybody's perspectives. Everybody brings something different, right? We're all diverse, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's age, whether it's setting, whether it's part of the country, we're all different, we're diverse. And my perspective and your perspective can be completely different. And if I can't appreciate that, then I can't make an educated decision. So it's about listening, it's about taking in all perspective and then doing what's right for the profession. I want to lift other people up. My greatest accomplishment is when I see former students or mentees of mine and they're now in positions of leadership, because that means hopefully I help them along the way to do that service and to learn how to be a leader. So that kind of tells you a little bit about my leadership journey and what my philosophy is. I'm happy to hear follow-up questions.
I have one follow-up question. So you've mentioned several times that you were asked to serve in a leadership role. You were asked to, be a district director or run for district director. Do you ever say no? Do you ever feel the need to say no? Only because, when you're, obviously it seems like you feel a very strong responsibility towards, serving the community, representing the athletic training profession. And I certainly appreciate that. But when you're looking at it from our standpoint, at what point do you have to say, you know what, this is too much for me right now, too much for me to handle because of family or whatever it might be? Do you ever feel the need to say no?
Yes. My priorities are family first, and then my mental health, which goes hand in hand, right? And then my job. And if I feel as if after considering those three things, I have time above to give service, I'm going to do it. But if I don't, and I was asked a year ago to consider chairing an NATA committee, and I said no. I can't at that point in time. It just wasn't something that I could add to my plate. Serving on the Katie takes a great deal of my time. I bought out my business partner about 1.5 years ago, so my plate filled a little bit more here, and I had to make sure that I was taking care of my family in addition to me and what I'm doing. Now things have settled down, so I know the next question is going to be, but you're running for president, do you have the time? and I had that conversation with my managers. We're very much a shared leadership structure here. I have managers at every clinic. And when I made the decision, when I was thinking about running again, I first talked to my family. And then I came here and had a meeting with my managers and said, if I do this, there's going to be more on your plate because I've got to take some off. And fortunately, they all universally said, Kathy, you got to go for this. Absolutely do it. We support you. But in every situation, I try to look at, I don't want to do it half-heartedly. I want to be able to give all in and be able to serve. And if I can't, I'm going to decline. So yes, to answer, there's a very long answer to your question. Yes, there have been times when I have said no, because that was the best thing for me personally, and for that ask, because I knew I couldn't give my all at that particular time.
Thank you, Kathy. That was a very thorough answer to my question. That was great. I believe Jess has the next question for you.
Yes. So we wanted to know, it seems there's a bit of a divide in the clinical and educational aspects of athletic training sometimes. And we were wondering what you feel we could do, or maybe what you feel you guys could do to help it, or what you would do as president to help encourage to keep that more of kind of giving students the same message. We feel like sometimes that they're getting two different messages, maybe clinically and or from their educational side.
So you're talking about the difference between education and what's being communicated by your faculty versus you as a preceptor?
Yeah, so we had talked with Katie a little bit about kind of how we feel like sometimes clinically when the students come, they, of course, you know, they're learning what the best practices are, and that is very, very important. But then how do we make it relative to what is best clinically without, you know, totally canceling out what they learned? Because of course you don't want to do that.
Sure.
So how do we kind of work to give an even message?
And that's a really fine balance, isn't it? That you want to talk about best practices, but in reality in the clinic, and being able to communicate everything that's happening can at times come into a little bit of conflict. I think that is so much about your relationship between you as a preceptor and your program director, and the training or the in-services that are occurring, which I'm sure are happening at your university as well. And having those conversations back and forth between what the faculty is teaching and what your role and your educational background is providing for that student as well. I see it as an incredibly well-rounded educational experience, because they get the best of both worlds. They get to see that best practice in the classroom. They get to see it implemented in the clinical setting, but also, and let's consider this as well, which is your life experience in working with these athletes. So finding a way to have that balance and communication between you and the faculty, I think, is incredibly important. And is adding to that exceptional experience for those particular students.
Thank you, Kathy. We have one more prepared question, which we believe is a very timely and important topic. Wafa's got this one.
Okay, Kathy. So earlier you kind of talked about, when I asked my last question, about diversity in our in our profession. So this question kind of goes hand in hand with that, but can you talk about NATA's role now in moving forward with social movements like Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ plus communities?
I think it's 100% our responsibility to do everything that we can to make sure that our members who are LGBTQ and people of color, or anyone who feels marginalized for any reason, is supported and lifted up by the NATA. The formation of the LGBTQ committee only happened 4 years ago, I believe. And so that shows a commitment to trying to support that community and what we can do for that, do for them. But it's also about, I believe, figuring out what is yet to be done. What are we not doing well? I said the last time I ran, and I continue to have said throughout this entire time, is our leadership. And when I say leadership, I'm talking from the president of the NATA down to any committee member should have cultural competency training and safe space ally training. People who are in leadership positions, committee members, committee chairs are typically choosing their committee members. And if they're not choosing them, the district director is choosing them. And if we're not aware of our innate biases, and we all have them, the research shows that we're going to choose people who look like us. And that's not diversity. We are stronger when we have thought diversity, when we have strategic planning diversity. And if we're not able to do that on a leadership level, then how can we expect our membership, especially our leadership, to be diverse? And the next step I would say needs to happen is there needs to be an external assessment of the NATA and what we've done. And I'm not saying we're doing a horrible job, but I think there comes a point where we need to look we're too close to it. We, as members of the NATA, even though we have experts in the NATA on cultural competency, we're too close to it. We need an external organization to come in and assess how the NATA is doing in terms of diversity, both from an ethnic diversity standpoint and from an LGBTQ standpoint and from a religious standpoint. How are we doing and what can we do to be better? And that would be one of the initiatives for me if I were elected. Our leadership should reflect our diverse population, and our diverse membership should reflect societal population, and we know that's not true. We need to do a better job of educating our students on social determinants of health, and whether we're looking at an athlete and thinking about those things that contribute to that athlete's lives. So there's a lot of things that we can do better. The racial injustice that has been brought to the forefront, and rightfully so, of what's going on in our society, I think has awakened a lot of people, me included, as to what have I been doing and what can I do better. And I think that's where everything is moving in the right direction. And let's continue to push that forward so that all members feel important, and those that have felt marginalized in the past no longer do so. I think that's an important part of what our responsibility is as a membership organization: protect the lives of our members.
So Kathy, I just have a follow-up. Thank you for the great answer about kind of what we would do within our membership already, but I guess a follow-up to that is we have a very low percentage in our membership of athletic trainers that are either people of color or African American. We've had a lot of conversations just within our school alone of how we can have some diversity just within our staff, but it's honestly kind of difficult when the whole body is. So what can we do, or what would you plan to do with the NATA to try to change that?
Yeah, I think we have to step up our recruiting, both from a high school standpoint and a collegiate standpoint. There's an organization in high schools, I'm sure you know about it, Health Occupation Student Association. And those are young people who are interested in the health professions. And we've only recently really gotten involved with that organization and exposed them to our profession. We've recently become members of, or not members, but we have someone at the table of the National Association of Healthcare Professions, Healthcare Profession Advisors. So people who are advising college students on health professions. Much because of the work of Mary Beth Hordusky, we now have someone in the room talking to those advisors about who we are and what we do. And then I think there needs to be a deliberate movement toward recruiting from predominantly Black colleges into the profession? How do we expose people of color to our profession and encourage them to get involved? We have to be more deliberate and strategic about how we do that. We know our membership doesn't reflect society, and it should, especially when you consider that our athlete populations are even more predominantly Black or people of color. So how can we start to improve those recruiting practices so that our membership reflects our ethnic diversity in our society? Again, we have to be deliberate, we have to be strategic, and we have to make it happen.
Thank you. That's great.
Kathy, do you have time for one more follow-up question?
Oh, absolutely. I'm all yours.
All right. Kelly, go ahead.
So Kathy, I had a question. I had actually come across a couple things that have actually bothered me at work. You know, as I am a Christian woman and I get Christmas off, no problem. What about Jewish, Hindu, I mean, the list goes on, who celebrate holidays where they fast for 24 hours, but are still expected to come to work and do the work of a normal day? How can we adjust, or as an NATA, what can we do to support those people? You know, I mean, Christmas is a holiday, it's worldwide, it's this and that, but it's, you know, if we're not allowing others to do that, you know, I'm fortunate that I work within a group that makes up for that, and they send them home and we take care of it, but not everyone has that ability. How can we better support or help those people who have different faiths, that have different, you know, days of worship or, you know, times and periods?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've done in my workplace is when it comes to my PTO, we have vacation, we have sick time, and everybody gets a personal holiday, and they get to choose what that holiday is. And I think that could be a movement that would help to solve that issue, but that's in a general employment setting. So how do you do that in a college? I think it's God, that's a tough, because it's a collegiate policy, and bringing that issue, especially now when we're really involved and active socially, bringing that issue to your university or to your employer and saying, you know, if I'm Jewish, I should have Hanukkah off. If I'm Muslim, I should have Ramadan off. How do we get that message across? I think it's also a part of what you're seeing now in society, and the movement to be socially active and to drive those issues forward. So I had, when COVID started and things were really kind of rough here, I asked, and we were low census, high staffed. I kept my people on. I kept my people on 40 hours. I bit the bullet and made that happen for them. When we started to ramp up, I said, I only have one ask, and that's for the next 2 months, nobody takes vacation. We stay here and we do what we need to do. Well, I had completely gone blank on the fact that Juneteenth fell in the middle of that. And one of my employees had asked for that day off, and I just did not make the connection until about 2 weeks before. And I went, oh my word, that was so wrong of me to do that. And I went to her and I said, if you want this day, you can have this day. I want you to have this day. And she said, no, I want to be consistent with everybody else. And I said, no, I know what this means to you, to your family, and to you as a group. You need to take this day off. And please forgive me for not noticing this earlier. And fortunately, I feel she did, which made me feel a little better about it. But being more aware, I think, and advocating for that for your coworkers going to your boss and advocating for that across the board. I think it's those little things where we just have to be willing to step out and say, hey, just as you said, this isn't right, and we need this to happen, and we're asking you to make this exception. And just as we saw with the movement, more people got involved, more people got on board, and we're starting to see things happen. Takes a village, right? I think that's what it comes down to.
Thanks for that, Kelly. You got anything for that? All right. Kathy, thank you so much. I think we're out of time.
It's 7
yeah.
o'clock. Oh my word!
I know. Went fast. That was a fantastic hour that flew by. Clearly, it was great to be able to chat with you. We are honored and privileged to be able to host you and do this. You know, let alone one. Just
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, just a quick note to everyone. The NATA presidential election starts on Wednesday, right?
Yes.
Everyone, please educate yourselves, learn about both candidates and vote. This is critical for our profession moving forward. Kathy, again, thank you so much for your leadership, taking the efforts, holding the reins to try to push this profession forward. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Time flew by, so I love talking about where we can take the profession. So appreciate your time and appreciate you asking me.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for your time. We'll go ahead and cut the recording now.